The West did not need to become Christian. We, like the rest of the world, were originally pagans. Christianity was a Middle Eastern religion, and the Middle East is the one part of the world where Christianity struggles to gain or retain a foothold. Places that did not encounter Christianity till much later, are more receptive to its message, than where it was born. We cannot therefore simply pass of the Christianization of the West to historic antecedents. Then there is the type and strength of the Christianity that we find in the West. To make this investigation meaningful to any degree, we must look at it as an experiment that has been carried out, perhaps not very successfully or competently, but there has to be a clear line of demarcation between what we might call Christian culture and pagan culture. Pagan culture is based on nature. Even when nature is animated by spirits, they are not sentient in the way beings are sentient. The fairies of the woodland and the ancient gods were victims of their own natures. They tended to embody the natural forces and the nature they represented. All they did was give man a way to communicate with the forces that were impacting him. Even if the Greek and Norse gods were viewed as beings, their life was more about the forces they represented. Thor, as the god of war, was simply that force that caused war and could influence the outcome. The Christian God is personal. He is a being with a personality. He can be known by his attributes. The pagan gods were known more by the forces they represented than by their personalities. They were always as one-dimensional as the forces they imbued. This might appear to be irrelevant, but it speaks to the types of people we are dealing with. The West is mostly whites. This has been their defining characteristic. However, this is a very superficial way of seeing the racial issue. Whites do hold a unique place in history, but it is not because we are white, and it is not because we have some genetic marker not found in other races. The division between whites and other races is the difference between Christianity and other religions. Christianity has largely been white for the same reason civilization has largely been a Western enterprise. At this point we might be tempted to wade into a long and tortuous analysis of history and cultural influences, but the answer is far simpler, as to why the West is Christian. The answer is as simple as the explanation for why it is easier to fill up a bowl with water that does not have holes in it, than one with holes. If you get the analogy, you can stop reading here. Nothing more needs to be said. Unfortunately, there are not only a lot of people who do not get the problem but are themselves a hole in the social fabric. The question then becomes one that concerns an inverse relationship. To understand how hard it is to fill a bowl with a leak, we need to know how large is the leak, relative to the inflow. Look at it this way: natural man is more intelligent than any beast, but intelligence does not put food in your belly nor stop you from being food for a predator. Devoid of natural tools and weapons, man's intelligence must be applied to the substitution of what animals have. We need artificial equivalents, or better, of what animals have. But there is still another boundary we need to pass. The individual is capable of only a limited amount of defense, including the creation of weapons. Even fashioning an effective bow or spear is not a talent that can be mastered by everyone. There are skill requirements and time constraints to making weapons that force us to turn weapons manufacture and defense into specialties. An individual might be able to make a muzzle loader, given enough skill and time, but it is a time and skill rarely available to an individual. And so we get to the greatest barrier to economic development, the need to specialize. This means there is a need to be able to spend prolonged periods obtaining an education and the advanced skill set that makes specialization as rewarding as it is necessary. The problem is, for specialization to be effective, everyone must begin thinking beyond himself or his closest allies. The one thing whites have, and which is needed to be attracted to Christianity, is charity. One must be charitable to advance economically and to entertain the idea of faith. We must want to do what benefits others. Unfortunately, those who lack faith always seem to misunderstand the nature of faith. Perhaps they do not wish to understand it. Yet it is hard to imagine someone having faith in Christ and remaining a social outcast or hermit. Christianity requires a social conscience, it requires social intercourse, it requires something akin to what the Good Samaritan had. Perhaps we failed to realize that the Good Samaritan was not just good, but trusting. He had faith the innkeeper would honor his word and that his own actions were worth doing. There was faith in what the Good Samaritan did. Surely that one act did not change the world, but it is illustrative of a type of thinking that if generalized leads to a willingness to take chances with others, to risk a portion of one's time and resources to help others. This is charity. 1 Corinthians 13 verses 4-5 Charity suffereth long, and is kind, charity envieth not, charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil. Charity is therefore willing to forgive and think the best of people. In dealing with the world, this charitable outlook may well seem foolish, but to assume everyone will rip us off and take advantage of us, ensures we will never produce an advanced civilization. Our faith is why the unscrupulous are able to take advantage of us. We must trust someone at some time if we want to advance civilization. This leaves us open to scammers. The unscrupulous look for people who are willing to risk being defrauded, just to do good. These people who willingly expose themselves to potential fraud, are the truly charitable. This is a problem for the worldly because they see Christians and particularly white Christians as naive dupes, begging to be taken advantage of. We open our borders, we write laws protecting minorities and even criminals, we attempt to understand terrorists and other evil men in case they may have a point. We apologize in accordance with the narrative of weak and powerless groups, just to try and give them a sense of legitimacy, thought, if the situation was reversed, they would wipe us off the face of the earth. Whites are the only victors who rewrite history to give losers some justification for their powerlessness. But in so doing we also legitimize their hate, envy and anger and destroy any chance they have of ever acquiring true human dignity. Patronizing losers does not make them winners. They are only winners so long as we hand out prizes to the runner-up. Whites are not a majority population. England had about 60 million when she ruled the world, and if not the world, the seas, yet she used her maritime power to fight for the least, the black slaves. This act of charity has never been equaled in the entire history of man and never will be. Yet, those who had the most to gain from this charity have never erected the monuments and celebratory holidays whites would have, had the roles been reversed. There was no need for Britain to stop slavery and many reasons why they could have maintained it, but Christian charity forswore such a possibility. But this is where things become difficult for the philosopher, because there was no logical reason to do this, normal analytical methods do not work. Indeed, the entire philosophical predicate of the United States fails to address the problem, because the U.S. is based on the natural avarice and selfishness of man. And what the West does, is rarely selfish and belies the United States' own premise. The United States was founded on the ideas of a few incredibly special men who forsook all to make a better union. But, why? They did not need it, and to a large degree they might have fared better, personally, under the king. Or they could have created a new monarchy. Why create a republic that placed a man-made document in the role of head of state? The idea was not the best possible one, yet it showed clearly what motivates so many people in the West. The fathers of Confederation were charitable men, motivated by biblical precepts if not always by the Bible itself. This is what is often confusing about the formation of the states. There were so much biblical influences in what took place, despite the Bible not always being at the center of the debates. And this brings us to the crucial point: the West is Christian even when not biblical, because the West is decidedly charitable, and this is what Christianity is all about. The United States betrayed its legacy, however, in its attempt to embrace unfettered capitalism. It created a constitution decidedly at odds with capitalism, then attempted to embrace both equally. It is difficult to imagine two more unlikely bedfellows than the premise that we are all created equal and an economic system in which everything has a price. Indeed, the U.S. in many ways attempted to belie the very thing that had made the West great, the charitable impulse that underlays all progress. The states want us to believe, humans, or at least whites, are not charitable. The impulse natural to us is to be greedy and selfish. According to capitalist theory, humans are all looking out for number one. No doubt this is true for a small number of persons, but the success of so many charities belie the capitalist mantra. Indeed, that so many businesses can succeed is a sure sign that people will sacrifice their own best interest to help others. No business succeeds solely on the abilities of its owners. Many owners have little or nothing to do with the running of the business. Even more owners have little to do with the success of a business. Indeed, nothing is more certain than that greed does not get you far in this world. There must be something moderating unabashed self-interest. There must be some sense of charity to permit greed to be expressed or allowed. If we all look out for number one, chaos ensues and trust is at a premium. This harkens back to the division between the child and the adult and between the spiritually mature and the spiritually immature. The spiritually mature are charitable. We think the best of people. When someone asks for a meal, we give them something to eat, because we assume they are hungry. If they even seek to rob us, we respond charitably. Because we expect that with the right kind of help, the person will understand the error of his ways and join society. But of course, the numbers who take advantage of this generosity of ours is legion. The devil wants to prove to us that greed and avarice is the only reasonable motivating factors. The Garden of Eden initiated the lusts of the flesh. The argument of the devil is that we would not die by ceasing to be charitable, but of course charity is not compatible with what defines the children of Satan. The charitable version of humanity did die after Eve took the fruit and gave it to Adam. The greedy, spiritually immature person is not the charitable person. This is why the greed-motivated person must die if the spiritually mature person is to be born. When we take this scenario and apply it to nations or groups, we see a stark contrast by those who live by the law and those who live by faith. The people who live by the law invariably live by the law of the jungle. The law of man modifies the natural law. By the law of nature we can rape, rob and kill if we have the power. But for the sake of humanity, nations enact laws to mimic a sense of charity. The strong are not permitted to take advantage of their superior power. We must be more charitable even when we do not wish to be. The West is governed by law but has less need of law or had less need for the law. Men were law-abiding because they had no desire to hurt anyone or to take advantage of their superior power or innate advantage. Even the very wealthy felt they had a social duty to help the weak and unfortunate. But over time, the state has taken over more and more of the charitable duties usually performed by the individual or church. The sense of charity has atrophied because the individual and church are no longer responsible for the welfare of their neighbor. As the sense of charity has declined, so has Christianity, and with it, the sense of a people with a mission and a purpose. Without a sense of charity, what is there left but the lusts of the flesh? In short, the West is as Christian as it has a sense of charity, and as its sense of charity exists, so too does its sense of destiny and the sense that we are a people who is situated for great things.